Welcome to the TrueWorks podcast, a podcast that equips you to understand how the gospel can transform your life and your work. I'm your host, Joshua Smith, and with me today is Doug Meikle. Doug, thank you for being my co-host.
I am your co-host, your guide, your existential explorer, all of those things. That's me.
Those are lots of big titles.
Yes.
And we're not going to explore them all right now.
That's probably a good thing for everybody concerned.
Yes, yeah. Including especially me.
Yes, especially, yeah.
So I'm going to pivot now and focus on what the podcast is actually going to talk about, not my existential crisis, but part 2 of N.T. Wright's Surprised by Hope. Now, part 1 we assigned to our Faith Work Intensive in the summer, really.
Yep.
And now we're at this kind of the middle. It's divided into 3 parts. What the future hope of Christians are, or Christians, yeah, I said the verb, right? Christians are.
The future hope of Christians is.
Is.
Yes.
Yeah, because Christians is a collective singular. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, not individual Christian.
Yeah.
Because we all have the same hope.
I guess so. So all you folks out there listening to this are now getting a grammar lesson too. This is like multifaceted. It's just like so much value being displayed here. We
want you to get your money's worth.
Yeah.
Of this free podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's set the stage a bit. Wright has begun his work in part 2, and what he goes through is some of the ideas or visions or anticipations of what Christians have and non-Christians about where the world is going. This is not nearly as cosmic and transcendental as maybe that question initially comes off. Where are we going? One answer to that question would be something like this. Well, we're not really going anywhere. Nothing really means anything. Just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. That's kind of the nihilist or the hopeless. What are some other options that he lays out on the table for us, Doug?
Well, if I'm recalling this, one of the things are always going to get better, and therefore the sort of myth of progress is that things are continually getting better and better and better, which in some senses, I suppose that's true. There are some elements of life where that's certainly true.
Right.
But that's the kind of the progress myth that everything will always ultimately get better.
Yeah, and where he really focuses in on the progress myth is not just technology, but like life, humanity as the human spirit. We are progressing in our morals and our ethics. And what he points out to us, well, don't look too closely at the 20th century if that's your view, that we're progressively getting better when we have such a bloody and tragic 20th century before us. Yeah. So we have like kind of the ultimate pessimistic view, everything's hopeless, and then kind of this overblown optimistic view. Another one that he goes on is something that actually Christians tragically sometimes adopt. It's kind of pessimistic in the sense that they say, well, since God is going to recreate everything in the end, he's going to kind of roll up everything in a scroll and throw it away in the fire, we can just kind of wait on him to finish his redemptive plan. We are just passengers passing through, and until he comes, we are waiting for him. What does all of this have to do with hope? Well, Wright takes all of these views of what the future, hope is always directed towards the future, and he goes back and he says, well, what exactly happened at Easter, which is the foundation of Christian hope? Because each one of those 3 kind of views of what the future is going to bring, none of those views are what we find in the New Testament as a response to Easter or the early New Testament Christians responding to Easter. Yeah. And Christians are hopeful. We are Easter people. So let's get back to the basics, Wright is basically saying.
So one of the things about this book, and actually Wright doesn't really pick this up, of course, Yeah, and I'm not sure he'd be completely happy with us pointing this out, but it does seem to me that he's also illustrating for us how that concept we talked about a few weeks ago in St. Augustine's Confessions, where that we need a purpose. We need a picture of what a flourishing life is like. And and the picture of that flourishing life off in the future kind of bleeds back into our actions in the present.
Yeah.
So for him, he is making that Augustinian point that our vision of the future of this place and our role within it will actually determine our actions in the present. We will change our actions in the present depending on what we see life will be like in the future. So it seems to me that's when you talked about this to me, you said that was kind of Act 1 of the script, sort of.
Yeah.
And so where do we go after there?
For Wright and for the New Testament, there is a pivotal change that occurs because of the events of Easter, the first Easter, that Christians are given this new hope, this new vision that bleeds back into the present. What's tragic and what Wright is critiquing is that we don't actually know what happened at Easter. We say we do, we claim we do. Jesus died, was buried, and was resurrected. But what that means for, say, the cosmos, not just for our own individual salvation, but for everything, redeeming everything, Wright is he's not inventing anything.
Yeah.
Right? He's going back to so that's what we want to unpack today, what exactly happened.
Yeah, and I think
Easter.
for his point is that I think you were making this point, and that his view, of
Maybe.
course, you never know.
Yep.
But N.T. Wright's view is that by not really understanding what happened at Easter, even though we say that, and we've confessed many times,
and we celebrate it, but it's under our nose.
But But his point is that I'm not really sure that we get completely what happened and what the implications of that now are. So we give it kind of intellectual assent, but maybe not let that kind of get too deep inside of us and reorientate us the way it should.
So let's start with one of the basic implications. With Jesus rising, with death not being the final word, we see that death, this thing that happens to all of us, both the virtuous and the unvirtuous, both the regenerate and the unregenerate, Christian, non-Christian, death ultimately is not the final word.
Yeah.
It's not the finality. That death is the ultimate enemy of humanity. I used to teach at a Christian high school, and when we would get to the curse in Genesis, I would say death is the human problem. Death, because it can't be solved until someone enters into it. And the first glimpse that we get of not just an idea, not just a philosophy, but literally someone rising from the dead is the first glimmer that, hey, maybe this possibly could not be the end. Drawing out the implications for those who follow that resurrected Savior is what's going to follow through chapter 6 and onward in part 2.
Yeah. And I think one of the little builds I'd make on that is that I think he also notes in passing, we're talking now about some of what we've learned by the resurrection. He also talks in passing about how the resurrection, if you like, the evidence for it, if that's the right word, is in there, and it's somewhat compelling. And one of the reasons why it is compelling is that it's hard to explain the phenomenon of the church without it. The very fact that the church exists and as an organization eventually grew strong enough to kind of reform and then almost take over from the Roman Empire as the kind of the force that kind of made the world what it was. I think his view is that it's hard to see that ultimately coming to pass on the basis of a falsehood.
Either a fabrication or something that they simply were ignorant of. Maybe Jesus was deceiving them or something. The events that we know of using classical historiography, you cannot explain those events. It is just astounding.
Yeah.
The empty tomb, the witnesses, the women who were the first witnesses
Yeah.
of the resurrection, and then the birth of what started as a very small
Very
movement,
small. Yeah.
but changed the world.
Yeah. And so just for those of you out there that are maybe a bit more skeptical about that, it's and maybe you would conclude something like, hey, any creative person, any imaginative person, good writer, whatever, could write this story. And the point is maybe a bit more subtle than that, in the sense that, yes, any writer potentially with imagination could write a story like this. But this particular story in that particular time would not be written, because some of the details within it would make it completely implausible to its surrounding community. One very easy example is the fact that women are shown as the folks who were the first witnesses. And in their culture, women would have been seen as a completely unreliable witness. They were considered in courts of law of the time unreliable witnesses.
So if you're trying to fabricate something and you want people to believe you, what are you going to write in to your fake history?
Yeah.
You're not going to write in women being the first to the tomb.
Being the first witnesses, yeah.
Yeah,
and
you're going to write in men.
That we might have an audience for whom the very fact of that might be offensive, but that's not really the point. The point is that in the culture of the day, to give women that, if you like, somewhat prestigious role of discovering the resurrection would have been a highly implausible thing for a first century author to do so, especially a first century Jew.
So as we look at these documents, not as scripture, but just as historical documents, we have to ask ourselves, so then why the heck did they write down that women were the first, if not that they actually were?
Yeah, that was a plausible thing. So once you establish that Christ's death did indeed happen, and Christ's resurrection did indeed happen, what do you conclude? Well, one of the first things we said is that death ultimately is not. It may be our enemy, but it doesn't have the final say on the cosmos. Death is not kind of the final answer to all the cosmic questions. It's that because Christ rose, then there's clearly a different answer out there for those, for some at least. Yeah.
That Jesus rose, then goes into, well, by what power did he rise? And it's not on our own steam. It's not by us conjuring up some great philosophy or following some wise teaching, but it's God intervening into history. As C.S. Lewis said, that those in the play of history could not discover God and what he has for them, the author of the story, unless he wrote himself into the play.
Yeah. And
by writing himself into the play, then he can communicate to the actors in that play. And so we are the joyful, the delighted recipients of God's action into history, principally at the story of Easter and him resurrecting Christ. But that's all well and good, but Jesus is like, he's not here now. He ascended. This was kind of jarring, at least for me. Like, I didn't know exactly what Wright was doing here in the work. It's like we have some momentum. Okay, we're hopeful, and now Jesus is gone. So what's the church supposed to do now? And Jesus gives us a promise. He says, "Well, I'm sending my Paraclete. I'm sending my Spirit, and thus births the church at Pentecost and through onward." So what does this mean for the cosmos? Why does this have cosmic significance? We are so prone, I think, in our, I don't know, evangelical is such a broad word now, but a kind of Americanized or westernized Christianity to say, if we do take Jesus' death and resurrection seriously, well, it's for me. You know, it's for Jesus saved me.
Yeah.
And right pushes back against that again. No, it's for creation, and we happen to be
We
part
are
of
part of
that.
that.
Yeah, perhaps very privileged image bearers, part of that. But even the rocks and the ground is
Yeah.
groaning. The heavens are declaring the glory of God, and Christ's death is not just saving and redeeming humanity, but all of creation.
Yeah. But I think, my sense of that is, and something we try to kind of get people to come to terms with in this faith and work intensive, is that why does Wright conclude that? Because the conception of the individual in the whole kind of biblical narrative is just not the individualistic interpretation of ourselves that we grew up with today.
Yeah, yeah.
So, to the extent the individual exists at all in the Old and New Testament, they exist in the context of a relationship to their kinsmen,
Mm-hmm.
to their peers, to the societies in which they live, to the creation that God wrapped around them, and that kind of overall kind of God-created economy. They are an integral part of that. They are not individuals and atoms that are apart from that. They are part of the created purpose and will of God. So it doesn't seem unreasonable then, if was God's, back to Richter again, if that was God's starting intent,
Yeah.
that his ending intent would be, no, I'm going to make that right.
Yeah.
And to make that right, as you say, the rocks on the ground, groaning as they are for the fulfillment of the sons of God, are part of that creative, that recreative process. And I think, again, this is one of the things that's so glorious about N.T. Wright's exegesis, if you like, of the New Testament, is that he can really get underneath a few things that I think that we have lost the sense of.
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about in TrueWorks about how we want to re-enchant.
Yeah.
That we live in a disenchanted time.
Yeah.
Where it is individualistic, atomistic, that my relationship to one another, to the creation, God's not even part of that picture.
Yeah.
We're just islands. And part of redemption offers us this enchanted vision of the world.
Yeah.
Because even in redemption, it's not just him redeeming these atoms, these autonomous willed creatures and subjects, but everything has value in a sense because he created everything good.
Yeah.
And he said
everything has value partly because everything's connected to everything else.
Yeah.
It's there. The value is perhaps also in the connections. Now, you've helped me understand this well, I think, in the sense that, what you've described, what is a disenchanted world? It's a world where things have no intrinsic meaning and where those who are powerful are able to exploit things and objects and people that are less powerful for their own ends and gains.
Yeah.
Whereas in an enchanted world, what we at TrueWorks talk about there is that the world and the people within it, the animals within it, the ecology, if you like, that people are a part of, has its own intrinsic dignity because it is a created thing. Yeah. So
it
therefore
receives its dignity from its creation.
from its creator.
Yeah.
And that dignity is not taken away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, for example, give a practical example of that. I think that many of our practices of automated and industrialized farming do not respect the fact that the animals, for example, that are being kept in cages where they're immobilized, as one example. That's not the way Christians should feel comfortable about another creature, another created being that flows from the hand of God. So I think that whole sense that there is a world out there that existed in a certain way, created, but now God is recreating. The practical influences of that will be with us all day and every day. And one place where they'll be is in our concept of what is good to eat and how should we treat those animals that either give their life up or are part of a process that allows us to gain nourishment and flourishing.
So this is this kind of cosmic redemption, cosmic view of the intrinsic dignity, value of things. This is what Easter unpacking Easter means, yet things are still broken. We live in a time between times. The kingdom is, some theologians have said, the kingdom is already here, but it is not yet. It's not complete in its fullness.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned this great illustration in other contexts, Doug, of the Netflix show Stranger Things,
Yeah.
where there are these parallel worlds. And Wright doesn't use that illustration, but I think it's a helpful one of where there's a world in existence. Well, I actually haven't seen the show.
Yeah.
Can tell me about this
Well,
alternate kind of universe, alternate time kind of?
yeah, I think to relate it to the anti-right thing, his whole thing, of course, is that God is redeeming this world, and He's in the process of redeeming this world, and ultimately at the end of the storyline of the Scriptures, that we are not consumed completely with fire. In fact, ultimately, the eternal city comes down from heaven and establishes itself on earth, and that will be God's place. As Richter said, that's God's people in God's place, enjoying God's presence. That's another, and ultimately what happens there. So there is this sense in which it's this world that's being redeemed, and I think that's that's an important thing to say right at the start.
Yeah.
Now, there is a problem, and that world is not redeemed yet. Yeah, or not fully redeemed.
Not fully redeemed.
Not fully
right?
redeemed
Yeah, the sons
yet.
of God and their
Yes.
new hearts are evidence, first fruits of the new creation.
Yeah. So what does that take? How do we practically kind of view that? And to use a kind of physics example first, before we get to Stranger Things, it's like almost as if the world as it should be and as it's redeemed to be is out of phase with the world as it is. And that means that these worlds kind of are not, one is here and another is up in the sky. These worlds are sort of aligned, but not in phase. And I think that's where the parallel to Stranger Things come in, is that in Stranger Things, these young kids discover this alternate world that's very close to theirs, which resembles theirs only as they call it, the upside down, where good becomes evil, and kind of is the organizing principles of that world. But it's like this world, only not, same places, but things that might be truthful and good are suddenly somewhat sinister and dangerous, And it's almost like heaven is the best illustration of heaven is like what we're the opposite side of that, if you like, mirror, and that we currently live in a place where things are not quite right. Where things are can potentially be. We're in the upside down. And what heaven is the world brought into line, and us, if you like, enjoying the world as it should be.
But it's not like we could get on a rocket ship
and go there.
And travel light years, and then that's the eternal city. That's the wrong.
That's the wrong way to see that. Yeah.
It's not a different space. The same space, but a different place. So space is this kind of, this volume, but place has this kind of identity connotation where the heavenly space is here, but the place is different, this out of phase.
This out of phaseness. Yeah, I just think that's an interesting way to think about it. And also, it also motivates us, I guess, as we'll go on to, like, it should that vision of the future should motivate us in the actions of today, as we keep on saying.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up, I wanted to just apply this, just a bit of what this already but not yet, this view of cosmic redemption and intrinsic dignity and value in all of creation, how we could take that to the places that we work in. I imagine one of the implications is, well, my primary motivation can no longer be exploit as much capital or resources or products, and that be my only motivation in things, both with people, but also with kind of natural resources. There'll have to be other values on the table.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, if you're mining for lithium. You're physically extracting, but there will be a way to do that is
Yeah.
a redeemed way.
Yeah.
Just like in your animal example, there'll be a way to do
Yeah.
that in a redemptive way,
Yeah.
because this is the space that God is redeeming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the food examples are generally good examples, because if you take a closer look at some of these things, then it becomes clear, wait, do we really think that's what God created these animals for?
Yeah.
Say, for example, a good example. So Karen and I, we spent 5 years in the Netherlands, and they're, I guess, like all other cultures, they eat a lot of chicken, and they have various different categories that you can buy. And they have one category of chicken that you can buy, which I think the Dutch word for it is plovertjes. Yeah. Now plovertjes. Yeah.
Okay.
Now what these chickens are chickens that are generally fattened and brought to weight so quickly that their bodies, if you like, get to weight faster than their kind of structure of legs and stuff can actually support the weight.
Oh.
So they are unable to support themselves, yeah, and they're actually born and placed into these cages where they cannot move from, and are brought to kind of their weight where they're culled and processed into food. But that seems to me to be a deeply wrong and kind of terrible way to treat a fellow creature. Yeah. California has been in the news because of practices that it is seeking to ban in the production of bacon. Yes, we're talking about bacon. Why are we talking about bacon?
Why wouldn't we?
Talk about bacon? Is that we can enjoy cheaper bacon because much of that bacon comes from pigs that are enclosed in a cage and may not leave during their entire life. And that cage also supports their weight as well. So these the happy picture of pigs out there in the pastures running around, that's certainly for marketing purposes only. The reality is many of the pigs that produce the bacon that everybody enjoys live a life that is not anything close to the way an animal was. If you believe, as Christians, we believe that they are created to enjoy. So,
and your favorite butcher,
yeah,
has an enchanted.
Yeah.
Even though he claims not to be religious, believe in God or anything like that, but he has an enchanted view of. He is a butcher, so obviously he does kill animals and consume them. But the manner that he does it
is important. Does it bring dignity to the animal? Does it recognize the animal's intrinsic dignity?
It is a redeemed way of butchering.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no else.
There's no other way to put it. Yeah, and I do think the so how does this relate to the book? I think what Wright would contend is that, hey, guys, because Jesus is risen, he is reordering the world. He is reordering all things within that world. That gets all the way down to the practicalities of life that you guys out there enjoy. So therefore, hey, bacon needs to be a bit more expensive, let's say. Maybe we don't enjoy as much of it as we do, but it needs to, and the reason why it will be is because we treat the animals that were created to live alongside us and support us as those that have been created by God. We just don't treat them as stuff that we may manipulate or change any way that we want, but they treat them as things that have their own intrinsic dignity. Yeah, and Wright's point is that the resurrection is the guarantee that reordering of society is happening. The first fruits have already been achieved. And we as Christians should not be sitting on our hands on the sidelines waiting for God to do more stuff, but actually getting off the sidelines and into the game, doing things and being part of
Part of that
a world,
reordering.
part of that reordering.
Yeah.
And
As-
we all have a small part to play in that.
Yeah. Well, we are citizens of heaven, but heaven is not some light years away.
No,
it's
it's
going to be right here.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah,
So-
I want to say a last word about those food examples, just so I'm clear about that. One of the reasons why I use food examples is because we all eat. We all.
I have heard that.
You have heard that, right? And no, but making a serious point is that we all eat. So we have access. We both have access to the problem in the sense that this is something that's close to us. We probably understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
But secondarily, we all have agency and empowerment. We can choose to do A and B, A or B, and oftentimes using ethically farmed and raised and slaughtered animals is somewhat more expensive than using factory produced products. But ultimately what that does is that we spend a little bit more of our resources to allow others, parts of God's creation, to have the dignity that they were created to have. I think that's just something that affects every one of us.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end.
All right. On bacon.
Next episode, we'll have bacon.
We'll have more bacon. Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us talking about bacon here on the TrueWorks podcast and what N.T. Wright had to say about bacon and other things in his book, Surprised by Hope, Part 2. I've been your host, Joshua Smith. This has been my co-host, Doug Meikle.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Doug. If you want to hear other episodes of our podcast, we're available on all platforms, or you can visit our website, TrueWorksHouston.org. Thank you so much.